go ahead and get started. First of all, I want to thank you for taking the time this afternoon. And certainly if we're new to the firm, it's great to put faces to some of the names we've heard. So thanks again for the time. As you know, we're here today to discuss the potential acquisition of an equity stake in Pierce Company and some of the analysis that you've asked us to look into. Before we get started, I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to the team. My name is Nick Spike. I serve as Senior Private Equity Analyst, kind of help pull everything together and make a final decision. To my left, Adam Wharton, Dan Brzezinski, two of our senior financial analysts. We had them charged with actually modeling out the two options that we were charged with. And then on my right, Kevin Sanker and Brett Stoll, two of our senior investment analysts, charged with kind of doing some out-of-the-box thinking some other strategic ways to do this deal. So I guess we'll go ahead and get started. As you look at what we have here is the overview of the presentation agenda. First, we'll start with an executive summary. Certainly, no reason to make you wait to get our final recommendation, so we'll provide you with that and a little bit of an oversight there. What we'll do then is dig a little bit deeper into each of the first two strategies that we evaluated. The 49% purchase of Pierce Co. through PE Shop, and then the 100% purchase of Pierce Co. by portfolio, through using portfolio company as the platform. After that, what we'll do is review the other strategic investment options that we looked at, and then we'll kind of come back to the beginning and review our final recommendation with you again. Again, no reason to wait, so what we want to do is provide you with our recommendation right up front. We feel very strongly, based on the financial and operational analysis that we performed, that a 100% purchase of Pierce Co. using Portfolio Co. as the platform, it provides us with the best intersection of both financial gains, capitalizing on the operational synergies, as well as sticking and adhering to the core strategy that PE Shop has had success with in the past in our core business strategy. When I mention that core business strategy, what I mean is we are able to leverage the scale that we have with Portfolio Co. And utilize that scale by purchasing a smaller private company in the same, an add-on acquisition in the same industry, allowing us to add value to both our company and to our investors. What you'll see here is we have kind of an executive summary. I want to touch on some of the key financial aspects. I want to start with some of the assumptions that these numbers are based on. First, we used a 7 times EBITDA multiple. What we did is looking at the past transactions. We took the last two transactions in 2009, which had a EBITDA multiple of 6.5. We also found a transaction that was of similar size in 2006 when we feel the M&A market in itself was a little bit more stable, which had an EBITDA multiple of 8.3. So using an approximate average, we feel a conservative EBITDA ratio to utilize for these numbers is 7 times. We also given the 4 to 6 year investment time range. We took an average of that and used a 5-year time range for these numbers. A couple of things I really want to point out here. First, you'll see we certainly recognize the cash infusion up front for a 100% purchase is significantly higher than the 49% purchase, and we understand that. However, we utilize NPV as our decision criteria, and NPV allows you to, and that's at the 20% internal hurdle rate for PE Shop. This provides us with a $24 million return, so capturing that initial cash infusion and earning the investors at PE Shop $24 million in return. You'll see that both options exceed the 20% internal rate of return, as well as the multiple invested cash. You'll see that they're in conflict with our NPV analysis. However, we tend to believe that NPV is a greater determination of value creation to the firm. We also believe that IRR and multiple invested cash lean heavily towards smaller upfront investments.
Why do you think NPV is a greater evaluation?
So what we believe, taking the 72.8, what I would say is at the end of the day, you're going to recoup that capital that you put in up front. We're saying this is our total, we have greater amount of return based on an NPV. It allows us to, that is our net gain, no matter what, you're recovering that capital up front.
The net dollar we're receiving back.
To answer your question. Oh, so what I wanted to say here is the IRR and the multiple invested capital are at odds with the NPV, and again, as we discussed, we use the NPV as our decision criteria.
question I have is, the internal rate of return as you showed here is higher than 49% purchase. And I'm assuming the NPV of 16.6 is on a $20 million infusion, whereas we only get 24 million on a 72 million infusion. Why? Can you tell me why you think we should do the 100%?
Most certainly, we'll get into that, but one of the things we'll discuss is not only as we meet our 20% hurdle rate, we're also going to consider some operational considerations. Knowing we've had troubles in the past with minority stake investments, we prefer to take a majority stake in the purchase and some other operational considerations that we'll get into as we dive deeper.
Did you factor in any synergies into your evaluation?
We did factor in some synergies. We found that it would be about $3.6 million in synergy. That would be the contribution to net present value in the 100% scenario versus the 49% scenario. Without having control in that 49%, just having a minority stake, we really didn't feel that we'd be in a position to enact a lot of changes in the organization and may not be able to capitalize on any synergies in this area.
How do you take into consideration the additional debt costs associated with the 100% acquisition?
What we ended up looking into was the charge of the debt or the cost of the debt and its impact on the feasibility of the deal. What we were really interested in is assessing the risk level. What we looked at was the EBITDA coverage. We found that it had a 3.7 times coverage, so we felt that it was relatively risk-free. As far as the cost of capital, we didn't look into it too much further besides that, as we were using the EBITDA multiple to primarily value the return.
Did the interest rate go up significantly with the 100% acquisition? Did you have the debt rates went up? Is that correct?
It did, correct, but still, even though we raised that first $4.4 million, the debt rate is 16%, which is still lower than the cost of equity, so we still felt good about that number.
But did we use cash flow on what amount per year, additional interest costs?
Well, again, we were using the EBITDA multiple.
You didn't worry about interest, obviously, factored into your NPV.
Right.
Actually, the net present value, what we ended up using was the 20% required return to PE shop, as opposed to using the weighted average cost of capital. So we didn't feel that there would have been much of an impact by the higher cost of debt in this scenario.
When you use your 7 multiple, what today's multiple was more like 5, right?
Right, today's multiple.
Obviously, what's your opinion on access to senior debt multiples today versus what's going to be in 5 years? What sort of analysis did you do to come up with a 7 multiple later?
We'll talk about sensitivity analysis later on. We actually looked at what point does this 100% option become preferable to the 49% stake, assuming that all the operational synergies are the same, all the operational considerations stay the same. We can talk about that later if you'd like to jump in now.
Your presentation, right?
Okay. Jump to the next slide. What we want to do now is kind of dive a little bit deeper into each of the scenarios that we presented. What we did, we had Adam Morton, one of our senior financial analysts, tackle the evaluation of the 49% purchase of Pearsco by the PE shop, and they'll walk you through that now.
In the 49% scenario, the current level of debt of $63.6 million would remain on Pearsco's balance sheet. Pearsco also has the ability to raise an additional $34.4 million of debt via second lien notes, which we would encourage them to do because at this level of debt, the cost of debt is actually cheaper than the cost of equity. So this would allow a total of $98 million of leverage, and at a $140 million enterprise value, that leaves $42 million of equity. So for PE shop to purchase 49% of that equity would require a cash injection of $20.6 million. Given this initial investment, as you can see, we calculated an internal rate of return of 35%. Net present value of $16.6 million and a multiple of invested capital of 4.5. Although these metrics are attractive, this scenario does not provide the control level interest that, as a firm, we prefer. And given recent disappointments with the minority style of transaction and our inability to drive change throughout the business, we came to the conclusion that this scenario was not a optimal transaction versus the 1%.
One of the things we want to reiterate what Adam was saying, we certainly see this as a profitable transaction. However, these are mutually exclusive transactions, right? We're looking at what is the best opportunity for return, both operationally and financially. So certainly seeing an IRR that meets our hurdle rate and an NPV that is positive is fantastic. But when you look at the operational considerations as well as the increased NPV that the other option provides, we see that as a better option. We'll move on to that. Any questions here? Or? Go to the next option. This certainly the option that we're promoting. A 100% purchase of Piersco using Portfolio Co. as the platform. Dan Mazuski, another of our senior financial analysts, was tasked with performing this analysis, and he'll walk through this with you now.
Question on this one. Mark Rogers, the head of sales, is the lifeblood of the organization, and obviously your numbers are predicated on having certain sales goals. How do you expect to deal with the Mark Rogers situation and his lack of loyalty to Portfolio?
I don't know if we see it as a lack of loyalty. We understand that he probably found a better deal for himself. We would like to go ahead and keep him on because obviously he's got some understanding of how Piersco works at this point. But we do make it a point to him to say we will go ahead and continue this relationship as long as it's a positive one. If it turns to be a negative relationship, we find another position for him or we let him go totally. But as long as we can make sure this is a positive relationship, we'd like to keep him on because he does have an understanding. He is a liker.
Thank you.
While you're addressing that, let's talk about the other people issue. That issue is young Mr. Pierce. What are we going to do with him? What do we do all that?
Yeah, and as we debated that back and forth, we don't feel comfortable putting the hands of the company into a 22-year-old person. What we'd like to do there is a couple options, and given our history with Piersco, one, allowing him to potentially sign on with an employment contract for a 5-year period, potentially with a buyback purchase down the road. However, we see it as Jack Pierce is looking to get out at this point in time. It's a tough market. He's looking to get out at a time when small private equity or private firms are not getting the full amount that they're asking. So we see this as a benefit to him to get out and allow him both personally and professionally to do other things in his life.
And looking at the 100% purchase of Piersco, in this scenario, what we're talking about is a joint venture between Portfolio Co. and from PE Shop, and we'll be going out to get 100% acquisition of Piersco. As we said before, this is a little bit more of a cash infusion. We're looking at $72.8 million, but this is going to be a value add for the firm. The enterprise value in this case is going to be $165 million, not the 140 that we're looking at with the 49% acquisition. The reason for that, as soon as you hit 50% and go beyond, there's going to be a control premium equal to $25 million in this case. To raise the $165 million in capital, we anticipate Portfolio Co. leveraging $63 million in new term debt, combining that with the $29 million they already have on their balance sheet, and combining that with the $72.8 million in PE Shop investment. As we said earlier, the IRR does exceed the hurdle rate of 20%. We have a 27% rate of return in this deal, adding $24 million to the value of PE Shop. The multiple on invested capital is 3.3 times. And as we said earlier, we were looking at the EBITDA coverage to try to assess the risk level of the financing of the debt. And we found that at 3.7 times, this was a relatively safe investment. Some of the other things from an operational perspective to consider is this is going to make the PE Shop investors happy as we're going for a majority control situation as opposed to the minority stake. The minority stake, as we said before, we may not be able to enact all the changes that we wish, and we may face some other operational hurdles in the way. The other thing we get is